Welcome back guys with another episode on our Twins 350Z. Now we've added a little bit more power to this car lately, which you guys will see very soon. And with more power requires more stopping power. So today we're going ahead with the Z1 Motorsports track big brake kit, and we're also going with a more street style of brake pad. This car will be seeing some track time. For the meantime, we're going to go with a more street approach. So we have our brand new Z1 rotors, brand new Z1 calipers front and rear. We have our Hawk and Carbotech pads here. We have some Motul RBF 600 fluid, and of course we have all brand new hardware, brake lines, pretty much everything you need to do this job. All here supplied in-house at Z1 Motorsports. So let's get started. Okay, step one, we're going to remove our wheels. Okay, so this is the 350Z base brakes. These are not the Brembos, but the principle is still very, very similar. We have a 22, which is going to remove our main caliper brackets in the rear. What this does is we'll just slide the whole brakes off. We don't need to pull the brakes apart. We can just take it off in one go. We then also need our 12mm to remove our brake line here. And then we'll also need a flat blade screwdriver to remove our pin, our clip in the back here that connects our soft line to our hard line. And the next one. So once we have our bolts removed, we can just remove the entire caliper and slide him off. So luckily today our rotor is quite loose. Sometimes you're going to have to hit this with a hammer. This may damage the rotor, but we're not going to be using it because we're upgrading our brakes. So a good solid tap should loosen it, or if you're lucky, we can just remove it by hand. Okay, so the next step is we're going to need to remove this clip that's holding in the hard and soft line together. You can use a series of different tools. You can find which one works best for you. I'm finding that just a pair of pliers or even a flat blade screwdriver will help get the job done. This part can also have some increased difficulty if there is some rust and corrosion present. Next, we're going to grab our 19 and 10mm to remove our brake line. I strongly recommend having something to catch the brake fluid, which is inevitably going to spill everywhere. It's going to go everywhere, so just have something ready to catch this and to dispose of it properly. And also remember to not let the brake fluid touch your paint. If it does, wipe it off as quickly as you can. See some brake fluid's about to come out. And there we go. Drip, drip, drip. So what I'm going to do now is just let some of that brake fluid run its course out of the way. And we're going to open up our new Z1 big brakes. These are directional, left and right. And the way to remember which way is your left and which way is your right is if you're sitting in the vehicle. So if you're sitting in the driver's seat, it's on your left side, left brakes. If you're sitting in your vehicle and it's on it says the right, it's on your right side. So very, very simple and easy to remember. And here they are. We're also going to reuse this box for our old calipers and lines. Big. All right, so these 6-piston calipers are definitely going to be more than enough for the street, and these are definitely adequate for the track. And these are fantastic because they use a lot of R35 variant of pads. So really any pad you see that fits an R35 are going to fit these. So we've allowed our brake line to drain. Now what we can do is just put our brakes straight into the box. One simple, clean movement. Keep that one there. nice and safe. So what's really nice about our Z1 kits is that we provide instructions with torque specs, but we also provide just about every piece of hardware. As you can see, these were getting a little bit rusty and sad, so now we're providing brand new hardware so you don't have to worry about any stripping or breaking any parts when you're doing your brakes. Okay, so what I'd like to do first is just get our line in place so that we can screw it into our caliper. That just sort of stops any mess, to keep on going. So what I'm going to do now is reinstall our brake line. So in this particular example, we do have a bit of corrosion. So what we're going to use is a little bit of brake clean and a wire brush just to brush off any additional rust or debris. Our 19 and our 10 millimeter is now tightening the brake lines back, and just do these ones hand tight, definitely not over tight, and we just want to keep an eye on our brake line as it is leaking fluid as we do this. So once we have our brake line installed, we have a bit more of a controlled way of our drip here. We can kind of pick and choose where we want to have that dripping. So I've just kind of set this to the back while we put our Z1 caliper bracket on. Now again, if you're using another brake kit, this would be very, very similar, but our Z1 kit is a really, really lovely design, and it does come with new hardware other than the factory bolts that hold the backing plate on. So simply sit this on the front here, run our bolt from behind, and tighten it into place. I like to get these just quickly hand tight before we torque these down. So now we're going to torque our caliper bracket. Click. And click. One more quick check. Good to go. Alrighty, so we're going with the R35 floating sprinkle rotors. Call them sprinkle because they look like donut sprinkles, and these definitely help dissipate heat. And this thing is just a massive upgrade over stock. What we're going to do is place this on top, in place, right into our hub, and then we can continue on with installing our caliper. And to hold this in place, you can just use a wheel nut. I like to place it on the bottom stud. So with the supplied bolts and washers, we're now ready to install our big brake caliper. We simply line up the bolts with our bracket, screw them in hand tight with the washers, and we'll get these to a hand tight state. This uses a 10mm Allen. We just need to tighten these ones down until they're ready to torque. Now we're going to torque this down to 74 foot-pounds. Okay, so finally we're going to grab our last bolt that secures everything into place, screw it in by hand, and also torque it to spec. This 13mm bolt is torqued down to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, so we've torqued everything down. Now it's a good time to install our brake line. If you have a look at the back here, I've just quickly routed the brake line against the factory mounting points. You can do this after the fact or before the fact. I just like to get them lined up now. And then we're just gonna go ahead, get our new bolt and washers ready. And this is gonna sit one washer here, like so. Once we put the brake line through, one will sit on the other side, like so. So what we're gonna quickly do, get this pull off this little protectant seal. Tuck this behind our line here. Get it nice and straight. And always start these by hand. Following our instructions, we're going to tighten these 12 to 14 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we have the brakes installed. Now it's time to put our brake pads in place. First of all, we're going to have to remove these brackets out of the way with our 13mm. Now it's time to install our brake pads. I do always recommend a little bit of grease on the back of the pad. And then we simply slide the pad into place. And it's probably one of the easiest parts of this job. So next step is now placing our caliper clips into place. We're going to face the larger section here and the smaller section at the top for the small pin, the larger hole for the large pins. Pop our pins back into place here. Put our screw in. And then we can just kind of slip this one down like so. Into place. There we go. Line this up so that this sits flush inside. We're now ready to put our smaller pins through the top. See, we may have to just do a little bit of pad alignment. You can lift the pad up and down. There we are. Wiggle, wiggle. And nearly have it perfectly lined up. Just have to just push this pad around a little bit to get it in place. Okay, once it's lined up, we can tap this one home. Now we repeat the same for the bottom. Put a pin through. This will have a bit of spring load tension as we're trying to do this. Tighten this one in, lock it into place. Use a flush, and then place our pin in. Bit of tension there, but once we're lined up, we can just tap it into place or push it in. Once everything's installed, you've torqued everything into place and tightened up these caliper brackets right here. I just like to give the brakes a turn, make sure that there's nothing hitting, nothing in the way, and also like to just turn the wheel in and out to make sure our brake line is not snagging anything. Once we've made sure of that, we can place our nuts back into the brake line holders, and you've done your front brakes. Repeat the same for the other side. Tightening our caliper brackets. Alright guys, so now we've shown you how to do the front. We are now going to show you how to do the rear. Very similar process, just with a few different steps. Of course, first step, we want to remove our rear wheel. And then we're going to move over to our new calipers first. And I'll show you that reason in just a second. So let's get started. Okay, so first step, we're going to get one of our pins in place. Slide the brake pad up. Get our other brake pad in place. Slide the next pin in. And then we're going to just tap this home. Okay, once our pin's in enough, we can hold our brake pads up, position them into place, and now we're going to place our clip in like so. This does have quite a bit of pressure against it, so just take your time. Try not to scratch any paint off your brand new brakes. And clip. It's now in place. And again, this will take a little bit of effort. You may have to give a little encouragement tap. Alright, so once we've built and prepared our caliper, now it's time to remove the old stuff. I'm going to start with this brake line here, which is a 10mm. So we've got our 10mm here, and I'm going to leave the clip in place while I loosen this nut here. This will just sort of help hold everything into place nicely, and then we'll remove it once it's fully loose. Now we're going to remove our clip with a pair of pliers. You can twist, you can pull. I find this way works great. So just twisting it out. And we'll keep this one aside. So just like the front, we want to be able to catch our leaking brake fluid here with some sort of apparatus. Okay, so our next step, we're going to remove the brake caliper as a whole. We don't need to separate it with the smaller bolts, just the two large 19 bolts at the back here. One right here at the top. I do recommend using a spanner to loosen these, as the traction arm does get in the way for our lower bolt. Get our lower bolt here. And there we are. We just loosen these off and our caliper will come straight off. Once our last bolt's out, we can remove the entire caliper. Alright, so now we just need to take our brake rotor off. In some cases you need to hit this with a hammer to break it loose. In our case, we're lucky enough just to pull it straight off. Okay, now that we have everything apart, it's time to remove our brake dust shield, or this trim here. There's a few different ways to do this. We're very fortunate to have a very nice Milwaukee tool that'll just cut this straight off for us. But you can look up ways that maybe be a bit more DIY friendly. We just need to remove this so that our new brake rotors will fit, the larger ones. So yeah, we're going to go ahead, cut this one away and get cracking. Done. Pop this one in the trash. We're going to get a file to smoothen this off. We may even just trim this to look a little smoother, and we're good to go. Okay, so the next step is we just want to move our handbrake shoes in To do that, we just lift up on this little adjuster, and this will bring our shoes in closer so we can get the new brake rotor on. Now we're going to get our Z1 brake bracket. This easily slips right behind, and instead of the bolts coming from behind now, they come in from the front. So sort of reverse of the way they came off. 1, 2, and then we'll torque these to spec. So now we're going to torque our bolts to 62 foot-pounds as per our instructions. One, 2. So while we have the most space and access, we're just going to slip our brake line in place, and we're just going to screw the line straight on. That simple. While we're here, we'll also get our clip in place. And then we'll tighten it up. Okay, so now to get our new brake rotors out. These things are a huge upgrade over stock, and will definitely get you stopping in time. And a big shout out to Carlisle Tools. They've been helping us out with all the tools to do this job, so if you need anything, head over to Napa or Carlisle, get yourself some really nice DIY tools. Okay, if our handbrake is pulled in enough, we should be able to slide this straight over, which we can. We have a nice bit of movement. So now we're going to use our inspection port and readjust the handbrake till it is sort of just moving. We don't want it too tight, we don't want it also too loose. So just gonna find that just right point. I like to get to the point where it's kind of hard to move and then just back it off one more. And don't forget, from your other brake rotor, take off the plastic cap or rubber cap, the dust boot here, and pop it in place. Now I'm just going to put a wheel nut on to hold the rotor nice and flat. Okay, so with our supplied bolts and washers, we're going to install these now, and then our pre-built caliper, we're going to install these onto the bracket. So we're just going to slide the caliper get one of our bolts started by hand. To our lower one here. Then we'll continue the rest with our tools. This uses a 10mm Allen, and then once they're tight, we'll torque them into place also. And that's it. All right, for our last step, we're going to remove the protective cover off the back here. We're going to get our supplied new bolt and washers. One sits over the top like so. One will thread through our new brake line like so. And then we'll put the other washer. Now that we've threaded the bolt through, we're going to put the other washer over the top of this and simply screw it into the back of our caliper. So with our 14mm we're going to torque this into place at the 12 foot-pound. It's going to be a little tricky because we don't have lots of space. Done. Alright guys, now it's time to bleed our brakes. We have the RBF 600. I'm going to just lift our cover here, remove the cap, and install our device. Alright, so once we've got our brake fluid filled, we can now start bleeding our brakes. We're going to start with the furthest brake away from the vehicle. So in this case, it is the passenger rear side. Okay, so we have our friend in the car ready to pump the brakes for us. We have our 11mm spanner, and we also have something to catch the brake fluid that's coming out while we're bleeding it. So all we have to do is start. We have two bleeding points. We have an inside and an outside. We're going to start with the outside and then work our way onto the inside. So I'm just going to pop our little tool on here. We can then simply loosen this and pump the brakes. We'll start seeing fluid come through here any second. And with a completely dry system, this may take a little bit of time. There it goes. So we don't see any air bubbles and the fluid is looking clean. Tighten that one up. And we're going to clean off any excess mess with our spare rag. Okay, so we've done our outer. Now it's time to do the inner. And it's the same process. Loosen that. You can also actually hear our pads locking in. We're actually watching them move. But as we can see, air is coming, bubbles through the fluid here. We need to make sure we get rid of all of those bubbles. And we're good to go. Quick wipe. And we can start moving on to the other brakes. We're going to keep going to the furthest brakes away, so we're going to move onto our driver's side rear, then we'll move to the passenger front, and finally the driver's front. Alright, pump them up. Okay, once our brakes are bled, make sure that we have a full reservoir, and it's on to the test drive. Alright guys, and that is how you install Z1's Track Big Brake Upgrade Kit. Just be sure to drive the vehicle and follow the instructions of your brake pad manufacturer on how to bed these brakes in, and you're good to go. If you have any questions, head on over to our website, z1motorsports.com, or give our friendly team a call. And we hope you have fun with your new brakes.